Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It's part of the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement webinar series. I'm Mark Rabin, a senior advisor with KaiNexus, and I'm really excited about today's webinar. It's titled Lean for Knowledge Work, and it's going to be presented by Kim Muscarda. He's the director of Muscarda Solutions, joining us today from Australia. So we have attendees from every continent, all corners of the world, and I'm sure we have people joining us today from many different knowledge work settings. So there's a lot to learn and a lot to discuss later during the Q&A. So welcome. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. So our presenter today has worked in the energy industry for over 25 years as both an individual contributor and a leader across several disciplines, including continuous improvement, asset management, and project management. Kim is passionate about continuous improvement, so he's here in the right place. Our audience shares that passion. Kim believes strongly that lean principles can be applied to any team in any industry to achieve high levels of performance. Kim also believes that effective leadership is essential for any organization to transform its performance, and he works with organizations to share his skills and knowledge to improve leadership capabilities and implement business improvement solutions. So Kim, I'm really pleased that you're here presenting today. Thank you for joining us late in the evening where you are. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome everybody. Hopefully this session will be enlightening for some and trigger some thoughts in others. Lean for knowledge workers, this is what it's all about. So a bit of an insight into how lean methodologies can be applied in a knowledge worker environment. So as you can see from the picture, and as Mark's mentioned, most of my career to date has been in the petroleum industry. Probably not your typical lean environment, if you like. I started off as a mechanical engineer and then worked on various projects, eventually moving into a management role, looking after teams, leading teams. I've worked on offshore FPSOs, which you can see in the picture. I've worked on gas plants and other facilities in different locations around the world. I've worked with field operations, frontline workers, but also worked with knowledge workers, obviously being an engineer as well. The last, I guess, decade of my career has predominantly been around continuous improvement in operations, in petroleum operations, culminating in a 2019 lean deployment for BHP Petroleum Australia. So today I wanted to share some of the things I've learnt over the years, and in particular how I believe continuous improvement and lean methodologies can be successfully applied in knowledge worker environments. So just to give you a bit of a brief of what will be covered today. I'll be talking a little bit about the model that I use, which is probably going to be familiar to most of you. I'll touch on what lean for knowledge workers means to me. We'll then go through the BHP case study, which will hopefully give you some insights into what happens in reality. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls and the challenges that I faced or have faced over the last sort of period of time with continuous improvement and lean deployments. And finally, we'll talk about opportunities for lean practitioners in knowledge worker environments, which I think should be, is quite exciting to me and hopefully to others as well. So first off, the model. So as you can see, we have, this is the model that I use in my role now as a consultant in the lean space. And you'll notice that it's pretty much similar to a lot of the lean deployment models that are used around the place. 3 pillars for me around operational excellence, purpose, mission, vision, and impact, and customer focus. And then you have obviously the branches coming off that. So I'm not going to go into any particular detail, but what I did want to sort of emphasize is I think this model as it is just as applicable to a knowledge worker environment as it is for manufacturing or any other processing type industry. So I guess the challenge for the group, and put your questions in the question space. Do you think lean can be effectively applied to a knowledge worker environment? And looking at this model, fairly typical type of a model, do you believe there's a better approach or a different approach? So really interested to hear what people think there. Just going back to the model, I think from a knowledge worker perspective, yes, everything in here is relevant, but there's certain elements of the model which are probably more impactful or more effective in the knowledge worker space. And now I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of those as I see it. So when we talk about lean for knowledge workers, I like to, and Mark's done this already in the intro, but talk about the definition of what is a knowledge worker. So we use that knowledge worker term quite a bit, but for me, I've got a very simple view of what a knowledge worker is. So pretty much someone who turns information into something of value for the customer. So if it could be a mechanical engineering turning material data or stresses and strains into a pipeline design, or it could be a geologist using seismic survey data to identify oil reservoirs. Basically turning the raw product, which is the information, into something of value to the customer. So very, very much in the same way as, in the manufacturing environment, resources type environment, people are turning raw materials into something of value for the customer. So yes, it's just lean principles in that sense should be applicable. Now, some of the things that I've, again, found to be more relevant for the knowledge workers includes purpose. So purpose is generally where I've found for knowledge worker teams a little bit different to potentially, say, field teams or manufacturing teams. Purpose is it's what I've found to be a more effective place to start for knowledge workers. And I guess the reasons for that is when you're in the field or you're on the line, generally your purpose is pretty clear. For example, in the petroleum industry, an oil field worker, it's about more barrels, or a miner on a mine site, it's about more tons. If someone on the line, it might be about more units. You can put your hands on that stuff. You can see that stuff. It's very, very, it's a lot easier to quantify. I think, though, for knowledge workers, exploring and understanding their purpose, why they exist, it can be a little bit more difficult and potentially confronting as well, because they can't put their hands on it all the time. They can't always see the fruits of their labour. So this is one of the reasons why we sort of start with this, because I think teams, especially knowledge worker teams, really do need to connect to purpose to be effective. And what I've seen already in my short time as a consultant is that most organisations have explored purpose, and they have these really nice mission statements, vision statements, and other bits and pieces, but they haven't cascaded those down through the organisation so that everyone at all levels in the organisation has a personal connection to that purpose. So when you're talking about knowledge workers, if you can actually build that personal connection to purpose, then you'll all of a sudden have someone who's happy to come into work. They're energized, they're solving problems, they're really keen to improve. So you can get a lot of mileage, and in particular with knowledge workers, by exploring purpose in that way. The other thing that we found is probably more relevant to a knowledge worker type environment, or more powerful potentially, is turning strategy into action. So what does that mean? So I think all of us that have been in that knowledge worker environment, possibly in big organisations, we've been to those town halls where the CEO or the managing director gets up and talks about the strategy for the next year, or next 2 years or 5 years or whatever, and the sound of trumpets in the background, and generally what people in the audience are waiting for is they're looking for those key words, the danger words like future proofing or transformation, because generally in a lot of the companies, those sort of words mean that there's going to be organisational reductions, cuts, which is not what anyone wants. So what that means is the strategy of the business or the organisation is not really being sold to the workers properly. And the more and more I work with companies, the more and more I see this, where that hasn't been translated. The strategy hasn't been translated into improvement priorities for the individuals in the business. And I guess for knowledge workers, more so than for the field workers, again, they're probably a little bit more thoughtful about that. And they're looking for the translation of company objectives into improvement priorities. So that's what I found, I guess, for the knowledge workers. If you can do it really well, though, if you can build that golden thread between the company strategy and long-term aspirations, if you can build that golden thread all the way down to the individual knowledge workers and their teams and their priorities and their KPIs, then it can be quite powerful. The other thing that we've found quite effective dealing with knowledge workers is talking about value and having value in the language. So what do I mean by that? So when we talk about value, and different definitions, but again, simple definition is, what is a customer prepared to pay for it? That's effectively, the value of something. So again, with knowledge workers, a lot of what they do on a day-to-day basis is not necessarily something you can put a value on. Now, this can be quite confronting to knowledge workers, because when you start questioning them about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and maybe questioning whether that's adding value, or how much waste is in their day, they automatically get into defensive mode. So it's about, well, what I do is really important, right? And don't sort of threaten me, sort of thing. But as you work with the teams and you explore that a little bit more, and you explain to them that yes, you can have transactional activities which enable value, that's fine. You obviously want to try to reduce those, but at the end of the day, sometimes they're necessary. And but there's also stuff that they do which they are actually transforming something. So they're, again, transforming information. So you start talking to them about that and sort of really start getting to think about what value means to them in their day. But the big thing is identifying the waste, because I guess for knowledge workers, probably more so than field workers, manufacturers, and that sort of stuff that I've seen, there's a hell of a lot of waste. And whether it be meetings that people are attending that they shouldn't be, whether it be approvals that are unnecessary, whether it be reviews of documents which are unnecessary, whether it be whatever it is, there seems to be a hell of a lot of waste. And there's opportunities there, and we'll talk a bit about that down the track. But certainly in the value space, I found that to be quite a big area for knowledge workers. So the other area which I'm finding in the last sort of 9 months since I've started my business is the area of processes, in particular for knowledge workers. There's a bit of a need there. There's basically, as part of the lean sort of model that we looked at the beginning, we look at the business's value chain, and with the business's value chain, there's a whole bunch of different. You can have as per the Michael Porter model, you have your primary activities, your support activities, but within that you have your core value-adding processes. Now, again, manufacturing line, the processes are quite straightforward. You got cycle times. You understand that it's quite quantifiable. Whereas knowledge worker environment, it's maybe a little bit more difficult, but it's still a process, right? So you can still map it out. You can do your swim lanes. You can identify your responsibles, and there is an opportunity again for knowledge workers in that space. Again, problem solving, that's a big one for knowledge workers. So obviously coming from an engineering background, problem solving is part of what you do as an engineer. But teaching, the finance team, for example, walking them through structured problem solving, that was one of the things I found to be really quite a bit of fun, introducing people to these concepts. Because these are smart people, but they're not always structured in how they approach problems. So simple things like problem solving can be quite effective. The other big thing with knowledge workers is around managing improvement projects, and this is where you see a lot of the need from the business, because knowledge workers tend to be very good at identifying great ideas, improvement opportunities. A lot of them are innovative. They've got lots of good ideas, but not always that great at actually executing them and turning them into reality. So again, this is where using Six Sigma type stuff and other bits and pieces, we can actually really help those knowledge workers turn those great ideas into reality. And at BHP, we've used products, the KaiNexus product, for example, as a means to help do that. But it's definitely something for knowledge workers that is very relevant. And the thing that I've found is that the improvement projects for knowledge workers generally are going to be more material, and we'll talk a little bit about that a bit more. But you're talking potentially significant savings or new revenue. So yeah, just a few areas of the model which we found is more applicable for knowledge workers. So again, be keen to get people's feedback on that. So the BHP case study. So I'm going to just take you through how we approached the BHP Petroleum Australia deployment. So you're probably thinking, well, BHP, big mining company. Well, if you didn't know, BHP is one of the biggest resources companies in the world. You're probably wondering, well, why did they get into lean? So BHP's been around for a long time, and basically they've had a lot of success. But what they found in 2018, they sort of did an assessment, and they looked at their performance over the last decade, over the previous decade, and they saw a sine curve of performance. So they would introduce an initiative, the performance would go up, and then it would drop off, then they'd introduce another initiative. So you get that sine curve of performance. So they thought, well, this isn't good enough. We need to do better. And they said, well, how do we emulate companies like Toyota, who have got that continuous improvement curve going upwards all the time? So hence we went onto the lean journey. So I was lucky enough to be asked to to help deploy the lean journey for BHP Petroleum Australia. So what we did is, like I said, we started with purpose, phase one. So we built that golden thread with the teams, and we looked at, we're turning those strategic objectives into priorities. We also looked at mindsets and behaviours, so team norms, behaviours aligned to the company values. We found those important just to set the framework for the rest of the work. The next phase, we moved into the value chain. We explored the value chain with each of the different teams, where they fit in the chain. We explored, as I mentioned before, their core processes. We sort of identified customer requirements for each of those core processes. So, for example, we used the SIPOC tool, House of Quality, to identify requirements, identify success measures, and we had quite a bit of success with that. The next thing we looked at is, okay, we've identified the requirements, we've identified our core processes. How does that translate into the day-to-day tasks of the team? So we looked at roles and responsibilities. Then we looked at, okay, we've got the roles and responsibilities, we know who's doing what does our team demand, what does our capacity look like, and how do we balance that? So we use some of those techniques, lean techniques. We introduced some of those to help the teams balance their capacity and demand. So going forward after that, we then moved into, okay, we're sort of ready to go now. Let's have a look at building some aspirations and targets. Where do we want to be? What does the golden thread tell us? What sort of operational limits can we stretch? So we did that with the teams. We then set up visualization. So we set up performance boards, workplace organisation boards, continuous improvement boards, the capacity and demand planning boards. And some of those were virtual, some of those were physical. Obviously, with knowledge workers, there's a tendency to want to have that electronic view rather than the physical boards. But there was a bit of a mix and match, which was fine. So we had those, the aspirational targets, the measures, the visualization. The next thing was around the routines, and this was a bit of a surprise for us. We discovered that a lot of the teams in the knowledge worker space, their routines were all over the place. And again, this was what I was talking to you about, waste. We saw a lot of waste in those routines. So, people attending the meetings that didn't need to be there, meetings being held at the wrong level, duplicate information being duplicated, communications being duplicated. And we did a bit of a cleanup in that, and that was quite successful. And we really made sure that was we spent a bit of time on that, because that's how we hoped they would sustain those good lean practices by implementing those routines. The next thing we looked at was, this was something that came up pretty much in the middle of all of this. Was you may remember in April 2020. I think the oil price actually got down to zero. It's probably hard to believe now, but yeah, it went down to zero. So anyone that has been involved in the oil industry at that time would remember the sort of the activity that started happening after that. So there was a lot of really focused sort of cuts and other bits and pieces to help deal with this price shock. Now, at that point in time, we're sort of probably halfway in through this. So what we did was we understood that as a business, the deployment would maybe need to take a bit of a back seat in terms of the business response and keeping everything going. But what we were fortunate in is we were asked to actually facilitate identifying some improvements, identifying some opportunities to help us with that price shock. So that sort of fit in quite well with our deployment, because we're able to demonstrate some of the techniques, the lean techniques in doing that. So again, that was part of the work that we did. And then the final bit in the latter stages of the deployment was really about sustainment. It was really about coaching. It was about making sure people, knew how to run the routines. They knew how to do the structured problem solving. Really helping the team, teaching them how to fish, basically. So, what was the end result, and what was the prize at the end of all of this? And I guess if you look at that, we managed to save in the 12 months from the price shock. We managed to identify around about $250 million of additional cash flow from either additional revenue opportunities or savings. But effectively, it was a very targeted campaign. We were able to identify a significant amount of money to help weather the storm, if you like. So you look at that and say, oh, 250 million, that's great. What a success. Obviously, that there's a lot of people involved with that. There's a lot of focused effort. There's a lot of talent, a lot of knowledge workers in the team there was already an existing continuous improvement mindset. So I think to say that we were completely responsible for that would be a total lie. But I think we helped facilitate that effort. But I think when you look at that 250 million, that sounds great, but I really know deep in my soul that we left a lot behind. There was a lot of things that we could have done better. There was a lot of things that we could have really entrenched in the teams to make sure that it was continued to be sustained. So I guess one of the reasons why we didn't do as well as we could was, and for me, was there wasn't that commitment from the top, from the leadership at the top. There wasn't that commitment, and so then you ask the question, well, why wasn't there? So there was a lot of reasons. Some of those reasons we knew about, some of those reasons we didn't know about. There was stuff happening in the background. But I think one of the big things was leader understanding. Now, this is something around lean methodologies. From a lot of these knowledge workers in these sort of environments, when they look at the model that I flashed up at the start, they'll look at elements of that and they'll say, yeah, I know that, or I know this, I know that. They'll look at that and say, yeah, that's all common sense. I do that all the time, sort of thing. And that will be their sort of their gut feel. But the reality is, it's not just the elements on its own; it's the connectedness of everything, how it all works as a connected piece. So going from purpose to strategic objectives, going to measures, then visualizing performance against those measures, identifying your gaps, doing your problem solving, implementing your improvements. It's all connected. And when you understand the connection, that's when it becomes powerful. And so that's, I guess, where we could have done better with the leaders. We could have helped them build that understanding. And I guess part of that was we didn't have enough time with them. They had limited time and competing priorities, especially at the time. So that was one of the reasons why we weren't able to build that understanding. Obviously, without that understanding, it was then very hard for the leaders to really role model the change. So rightly or wrongly, people tend to follow their leaders. And what we found was if the leaders didn't understand the benefits, they weren't able to role model, then they weren't able to tell that really good change story to their teams, and they weren't able to bring their teams along on the journey. So that was obviously a bit of a pitfall as well. The other thing that was a bit of a pitfall was the preparation. So we weren't, again, going into a knowledge worker environment, you're going to get found out if you're not ready. So if you're not prepared, if you don't have all your guns loaded, you're going to get found out. And we were, unfortunately, prior to us doing the deployment, there had been some misinformation or sort of rollout which wasn't done very well. So we're sort of on the back foot in that space. But it just reiterated to me that preparation is key. in these type of environments. Coaching alignment and sending the same message, that was also a bit of a problem. We had our coaches in Petroleum Australia, but then we had a broader team based in other parts of the world, and sometimes we're getting mixed messages, and not only from the petroleum side but also from the BHP minerals side. So that was something which caused a few dramas. And I guess the final thing for me in terms of maybe a pitfall but also a great opportunity is one of the things I discovered was that I wasn't a very empathetic person. So throughout the process, I discovered that I needed to be better at influencing people and also better with empathy and really getting to understand individuals. So even as a peer, which I was to most people, I still didn't have that influence and empathy that I needed. So I've sort of worked on that pretty strongly over the last sort of 12 months to address that. So again, that's a pitfall there. So exciting bit, I guess, what are the opportunities for lean practitioners? So from my perspective, I think, again, I've said this before, but the lean methodologies are just as applicable to a knowledge worker environment. And I believe there's some unique opportunities in particular that they do provide. Now, I've been doing a lot of reading of Michael Porter's stuff. You probably have heard of Michael Porter, no doubt. These books are not the easiest reads in the world. I wouldn't say they're page turners, but they're very, very informative, and they've got some really good insights. One of the things I've discovered with the knowledge workers, and I'm seeing a need with some of the businesses I'm talking to, is really getting them to understand their value chain. So understanding their own value chain, so their primary support and support activities, but also the value system. So, their suppliers' value chains, their customers' value chains. Where do they fit in the environment? So that's certainly a space where I see there's opportunities, and that thinking of the value chain then transforms into competitive advantage. So when you look at Michael Porter's work, he talks about two ways to get competitive advantage. So you can be the lowest cost provider, which is very, very difficult, or you can differentiate. So generally the preference or the most successful businesses will differentiate. So in a knowledge worker space, you can differentiate from the quality of your processes. So where you have your processes, as we discussed, every primary or support activity involves processes. If you can really improve those processes and get them to the point where they're efficient, delivering exactly what the customer needs, maybe more than what, the surprising the customer with what you can do, then you actually start building differentiation between what you're doing and what your competitors are doing. So core business process improvement and the broader management system optimization is a great opportunity from my perspective. We talked about cascading of strategic objectives. So again, introducing some of these knowledge worker teams to things like Hosh and Canry, showing them how they can cascade those high-level strategies into improvement priorities at their level. That's actually quite an exciting space for a lot of the leaders in these sort of teams and these sort of businesses. So it's one of those things that I probably would found a little bit surprising is some of the excitement that has been generated around that stuff. The other thing is other opportunity, especially for knowledge workers, around unlocking innovation. As I mentioned, there's a lot of smart people, a lot of good ideas, but they're not always able to sort of flesh those out in a structured way. So things like structured problem solving, I've found, can really sort of unlock some of this stuff that's sitting in their brains, and then helping them work with managing improvement projects can then turn those into reality. So again, that's certainly an opportunity for us as lean practitioners. And finally, the material improvement opportunities. So because a lot of knowledge workers are involved in the operational limits of different processes, so they're actually best positioned to identify the big hitters, the big wins. So what I call material improvements. So if you can actually deploy that lean thinking to these knowledge worker teams and start generating these improvements, you can actually come up with some significant opportunities and significant wins for the business, as we saw with the BHP Petroleum example, the Petroleum Australia example of 250 million. A lot of those ideas were not necessarily your straightforward standard ideas. Some of them were out of the box, and because they were exploring those operational limits. So again, some opportunities there. So I think that is the final slide. So hopefully I've got you all thinking about, knowledge workers and what lean means to them, and hopefully you've been sort of identifying some opportunities.
Well, Kim, thank you for sharing all that. And we've got a lot of time here for Q&A, which is great. But before we do that, we'll let Kim have some water or catch his breath, and we'll go through a few quick announcements. If you can advance that, please, Kim. So we want to tell you about upcoming webinars. We've already got our April and May webinars lined up, June pretty tentatively lined up, so you can register or get notified about future webinars, or both, by going to kainexus.com/webinars. You're all welcome to register for our next presentation style webinar like today. It's going to be titled Building a Learning Organization. It's going to be presented by Sabrina Malter. She is based in Germany, has done a lot of lean work with pharmaceutical companies. And I think there's going to be a nice overlap from today's discussion of knowledge work to Sabrina's work, looking at lean and research and development settings, and more broadly, how do we create learning organizations? That's something we should all be interested in doing. So she'll be presenting that on April 11th. Registration is open right now. Again, if you go to kainexus.com/webinars, you'll see the link for that. If you are a KaiNexus customer, our next edition of the training team office hours with Brittany Currier and Morgan Robertson. They're going to be talking about the 3.0.1 release of KaiNexus. They're going to be doing that tomorrow, 1 o'clock Eastern. Again, customers only. You can register at kainexus.com/webinars. But one other thing that's open to everybody is our continuous improvement webinars on demand library. So today's webinar by Kim will be part of that archive. You can find it's well over 100. I never have the count handy, but it's more than 100 webinars that you can find in that library. They're all free. We encourage you to check those out. Next slide, please. I want to invite you also to check out our blog at blog.kainexus.com. There are actually 2 sub-blogs there. One, you see the blue highlighting, is what we call our improvement blog, with content that we think is of interest to everybody in our community, including people attending our webinars. We also have a customer blog that talks about new releases, new features, things like that. So again, you can find that at blog.kainexus.com. Next slide, please. I want to also tell you about our podcast, the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement Podcast. The audio of today's webinar will be there in the podcast. So if you want to re-listen, revisit, or share the audio, you can find that at kainexus.com/podcast, or you can search your favorite podcast app or directory. And with that, we'll do Q&A. So again, you can find, you see Kim's email address. You can see his website, muscardasolutions.com.au. So I encourage you to go check that out. So we've got a lot of questions coming in. I jotted down some questions. There were a lot of great thought starters here from your presentation, Kim. So here's a question from Faisal. He asks, from your consulting experience, do you prescribe that an organization do some homework or do other preparation before they seek external advice or help? Like, ideally, what sort of preparation would help an organization?
Yeah, 100%. What I've found talking to some of the companies over the last 9 months is I'm not the first person that they've spoken to. And they've been, I guess, disappointed in some of the individuals that they've spoken to. I think not because of the individuals, is because they haven't really been able to frame exactly what they want. So it's a great question. What I've discovered is that you generally have to spend a bit more time with them to really understand what they need, or what they really need, not what they say they need. So it's a little bit different to your straightforward manufacturing space or your other process industry, whatever, where it's pretty clear cut. We want to implement 5S or blah 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 blah. This one, you do need to do a bit of exploration. But some of those things that I mentioned around value chain and other bits and pieces, they're things that I've discovered are becoming a bit more common.
Great, thank you, Kim. Let's see. There's another question here from Andrew. Says, first off, thank you for the presentation. How do you overcome the challenge of people being too busy to make improvements? And then also maybe being too busy to measure the before and after conditions to help document the impact of their improvements. I can tell by your reaction, you've run across, I think we've all run across this.
Yeah, I if I had $1 for every time someone said I'm too busy being busy, then I wouldn't be. I'd probably be on the Bahamas or something like that, sipping a cocktail. But it's one of those things. It seems to be a bit of I think it's a bit of a cop out. And when you actually when we looked at things like the routines and the meetings, for example, what we discovered was there was a hell of a lot of waste there. So and I guess that's why there was a bit of excitement generated about that, because all of a sudden we were giving people time back. So what we found was people are attending meetings that didn't need to be in meetings, because their supervisor would get them to come along to explain something because their supervisor didn't understand that problem, which is not the way it should work. But anyway, that is a problem. But I guess you just have to really sort of focus on, okay, you don't have enough time. Why don't you have enough time? Mm-hmm. Let's have a look. Let's do a bit of downtime, and do that downtime analysis with the teams and actually give them some time back. And that could be a good way to start the exercise rather than go in all guns blazing, actually free up a bit of that time.
Yeah. To me, I think before going into that other part, sorry, I was just going to add, yeah, I agree with you. I think if people say I'm too busy, that's a problem that can be solved. Yeah. And you laid out a couple of good places to look of, if improvement is important, let's figure out how to make the time.
Yeah. And the other thing that was mentioned was around the measures before and after and that.
Right.
What I found was, especially in the petroleum industry, we're very good at measuring stuff.
Yeah.
So we generally have a lot of that data and a lot of those measures. So I would say it was probably not as much of a problem in terms of the time constraints there, but certainly putting a bit of structure around that was certainly helpful.
I think one other thing I've found, I would just add about helping make time for improvement is starting with small improvements. Because a lot of times people think of improvement being a project, and a project might likely be very time consuming and very involved, and people get scared off, or it's harder to make available a huge chunk of time. And that's where, at KaiNexus, we're big believers in the Masaki Amai school of Kaizen that says basically just, start very small, baby steps. You maybe then start building confidence, and that helps people maybe then work up to bigger problems and freeing up time to work on bigger problems.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it is certainly the right approach and what we found to be successful. And again, using things like simple tools, those Kaizen bursts and other bits and pieces, and the downtime, even that just from the waste identification, especially when they start talking about time constraints. Well, why don't you have the time? Let's explore that.
Yeah. All right. Next, we've got a question from Jill, who's asking you if you can talk more about how you introduce lean as a system versus being a set of tools. And she adds the point, people sometimes think when they use A3s or they have standard work that they're quote unquote lean.
Yeah, that's a good question. And this wasn't my analogy. I won't lay claim to it. And I can't even remember who put it in my head, but it was basically the analogy of a laptop. So, the laptop that I'm using, the laptop that everyone else is using, has a system, right? It could be iOS or whatever it is. Now that's a system which relies on, so all of the software, all the different tools, if you like, in that system all are integrated. And without that integrated system, those tools on their own won't work or won't be as effective. And it's the same, I guess, from a lean perspective. And from my personal perspective, that was one of the great learnings for me over the course of the deployment, was building that understanding of lean as a system. It takes time to do that. And as a coach, what I try to do now is fast track people's understanding of that connectedness. And I think that's where some of the lean practitioners fall down, because they stick to the individual tools when they're talking to potential clients. And so the potential clients are just, yeah, I know that, or I know this, and they're not seeing the connectedness. And it's the connectedness that is a key. And one of the things is I've really enjoyed my time so far as a consultant is actually seeing when the penny drops. So talking to a managing director about, the value chain and core processes and improvements and, process KPIs and all that, and talking to them about connectedness, and then seeing the penny drop, and then seeing them tell that story of connectedness to their people. That's where you think, yeah, that's, they've got it, So, but it takes time.
One thing I really liked about your the visual that you shared of your lean deployment model, and I would encourage people, they can download the slides and go back and really spend more time studying that. Like you could have probably talked 40 minutes alone of just digging into different parts of that model. And one thing that struck me, it's not a model that was a collection of tools. It was a collection of concepts and mindsets and broader business practices. And I think you're very right to call it an integrated system. Toyota uses that language. They talk about an integrated system, and the challenge with an integrated system is that you can't just take bits and pieces and expect it to work the same. Like, I love the analogy. You talk about laptops, you could talk about a car. So I want to go build a best in breed car. And if you were to get a Tesla battery pack and a Range Rover body and Mercedes electronics and seats from Toyota, like that does not create a system. It would not be a functional vehicle. And so I guess, throw it back to you for one other question. Like, how do you help guide people to avoid this trap of like, well, I like that piece of your model, Kim, and I like that part of it, where they might be losing out on the benefits of that integrated system approach?
To be honest, most of my success to date has been doing it on a whiteboard. When you can explain how it's all connected on a whiteboard, for some reason that seems to resonate. And I think it's actually having the confidence or building that knowledge so that you can explain it as a system. And like I said, it wasn't so, like I said, with the preparation for the for our deployment wasn't that great, because we had a whole bunch of slides, a whole bunch of stuff, but nothing in a very good sort of package. Hundreds and hundreds of slides. Yep. And then by the end of it, when I was going through teams, coaching teams, or introducing new people to it, I was doing everything on a whiteboard. I was doing the whole session on a whiteboard, and that's where, I don't know, there must be some psychology towards it, but when you can explain something on the whiteboard, it seems to resonate with people a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm with you, because I think, PowerPoint slides, even though you can jump around, I guess, but there's this linear sequence. It's the same challenge with the book or a presentation, linear sequence. When a lot of these ideas are so interconnected, you could talk about them in different orders based on the problems people are bringing up, the challenges, the questions they're asking. So I could see that being helpful in the flexibility, and it shows your mastery of a subject. The fact that you're not like just reading the slides, you exactly. know this, and you can draw it out.
Yeah, and what you find is you actually get quite passionate about it as well, because drawing all the different elements and then drawing the connections, it's a bit like a painter working on a canvas. So you actually, as you find yourself, as you're talking about these things, demonstrating some passion around it. And I think that is another important part of it. If you can actually demonstrate that passion, that can lead to success with individuals as well.
Yeah. All right, we've got another question here from Katie. She asked, going back to your case study at BHP, what tools did you use for the digital boards, and what are some consideration for using digital boards versus physical boards?
Yeah, look, funnily enough, it was a bit of a challenge for us. We had Power BI. Everyone would be familiar with Power BI. But you'd think with a company as big as BHP that we would have some technical person helping us build that sort of stuff. But unfortunately, we didn't. So we're a little bit limited in our own skills, and the teams themselves were a little bit limited in their skills. So it was quite easy to come up with, or not easy, but it was pretty straightforward to come up with a design once we'd identified the right measures. But actually turning that into something that could be displayed virtually was a bit of a challenge, simply because we didn't have the expertise. Now, that's why I love the KaiNexus product, because I can see the potential. And I think when we were originally talking to KaiNexus, I was talking about all these other things that we could potentially build the tool for, but I think I scared everyone away. But it's great to be able to have a tool which is it's intuitive. It includes that connectedness, so it goes from problem solving to managing improvement projects, that sort of thing. So it's very important, but unfortunately, it is a bit of a challenge unless you've got those sort of expertise in-house and available. So
yeah. And I would encourage, if people in the audience are unfamiliar with KaiNexus and the software that we make, and we have a lot of customers doing digital boards on the KaiNexus platform, and I'll add a thought, and Kim, curious if you have thoughts around, again, digital versus physical. I started off doing improvement work with physical boards, whiteboards, bulletin boards. That's great for a local team, but once the organization starts getting larger, multiple sites, let alone multiple states or multiple countries, even within the same building, it's difficult to get visibility to a physical board. And doing a digital board where you can have a large screen, touch screen TV, you can make that interactive, and KaiNexus helps support that. So I would encourage people to take a look at our website or reach out to us if anyone has questions about that. But thoughts on digital versus physical?
Yeah, definitely. The physical makes sense in different situations, like you said, like a 5S board in a warehouse. Obviously, that's something that's going to be in most occasions physical and makes sense to be. But you raise a good point around, the being able to move through different organisations as you got multiple layers in an organisation. From a strategic point of view, you want to be able to see the strategic bit, then you want to be able to drill down into the tactical bit, then you wanted to, if you wanted to be able to drill down into the operational piece. And that drill down isn't always a function or functionality of a product. And we tried to do it with Power BI. We'd had some limited success. But yeah, I think the KaiNexus product sort of tends to do that a lot better. But I think some people get stuck on the physical boards, some people get stuck on the virtual boards. I think there's room for both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they can coexist. Another question, we have time for one or two more here maybe. Andrew asks, what was the ratio of small improvements, like continuous improvements versus larger improvement projects? Did that mix change over time, and where did the measured improvements tend to come from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because prior to the deployment, I was involved in a continuous improvement space, and we had probably tried three or four solutions around identifying improvement opportunities and ideas. And what we found was there was a whole bunch of the small stuff, right? And in that small stuff, there was a very small percentage of stuff which was material. And what that small stuff, whilst it's from all good intentions, what it can become noise, and it can actually stop you from seeing those material opportunities, and it becomes too hard to manage for teams as well. They don't know where to start. So one of the things we found was, and this is where the beauty of the connectedness of the thing, you go back to core process, go back to value chain. So where someone identifies an improvement opportunity, it should either be related to a performance gap on your performance board, something which you control. It could be related to a problem with your core process, but it should be traceable back to the core process that you own as a team. So if we use the 3-ply toilet paper example, we'll save $500 by using 2-ply instead of 3-ply, that sort of thing. You got to get rid of that noise, and a great way to get rid of that noise is to really focus on core processes. So the team is really focused, and when the team improves their core processes, what we call their process KPIs, those proactive measures, start improving. But it's a good question, and it's a lot of teams and businesses I've seen get really bogged down in that, because they end up generating a lot of noise, whereas the real value is in those small number of opportunities. That's where the focused effort that we had post the oil shock, we only had a small number of people working on it relative to the size of the organisation, and we really put some structure around it, and we made it quite clear that we didn't want any of the small stuff. We would just focus on the big stuff. So you got to set those boundaries as well.
So as we wrap up here, I'll add a thought. It seems like the opportunity for lean and knowledge work is improving the core flow of the work, not just going out and buying continually cheaper toilet paper. There's always going to be cheaper toilet paper. Let's not keep doing that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I didn't expect that to be part of the discussion today. But Kim, thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for doing a great job with the Q&A. Thank you to the attendees for submitting really good questions. So again, I want to thank our presenter today, Kim Muscarda. He's the director of Muscarda Solutions. You can find him online at muscardasolutions.com.au. So thank you everybody for attending. There are a bunch of thank yous coming up here in the chat. I'll encourage people, please do fill out the post-webinar survey. And again, you can go to kainexus.com/webinars to register for upcoming events. So Kim, thank you. Thank you again. Time for you to go to bed. All right.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
See ya.